Hello, and a very warm welcome to our creative collaboration session. I'm Charlotte Abrahams. In this virtual format, we're keeping our community engaged and inspired by bringing together designers and industry insiders for some really fascinating conversations online. And today I am delighted to be introducing Matt Berman and Andrew Cochin, who are founding principals of the award-winning multidisciplinary architecture and design studio workshop, APD. Welcome, Andrew and Matt, joining us from the US this morning. These webinars shine a light on creative partnerships, and this one between Arteria's and Workshop APD is a brilliant example. So settle back and prepare to hear what wonderful things can happen when architecture meets craft. Before we start talking about the collection itself, it would be really lovely just to get an insight into Workshop APD. We've got some pictures of just some of the different projects you work on. Perhaps you just talk us through those. I don't know who wants to begin. Andrew.
Sure. I think as you clearly articulated, we are a multidisciplinary studio, which is something that I think Matt and I are very proud of how we've built, and this practice has evolved. We started out about 23 years ago together, really cutting our teeth into residential work, which we still do quite a bit of. And we've sort of evolved and grown into a practice that has multiple verticals that have led us to this collaboration with Arterias. We do a lot of urban homes, as you can see in the image on the screen right now. We do a lot of homes outside of the city around the US and the Caribbean, and we've actually done a few projects in Europe as well. And then we've also started to really, about 10 years ago, start looking into more development work, multifamily projects, both in the urban setting and in the rural setting outside of Manhattan. And that was really, I think, a real watershed moment for our practice, that we started to see projects at a larger scale and what that could mean and what that looked like for our practice. And from there, we grew into doing some hospitality work. We had some initial opportunities to work on some restaurants that then allowed us to leverage our work into ultimately doing hotels, which we're working on several right now. And in the world today, the residential homes want to feel like hospitality experiences. The hospitality experiences want to feel like escaped residential experiences on your own somewhere in a remote place. And ultimately the development work sort of sits in the middle and wants to embody all of those characteristics into those experiences for the new residents and lure people into these new homes in luxury markets around the country. And out of those projects grew this notion of product. It was about, I think, 15 years ago, we launched the interior design portion of our practice, just believing that bringing a holistic vision to our work was going to be something that sort of satisfied our appetite for design at all scales a little bit more. And then out of that interior design studio grew this idea of wanting to control everything and design bits of furniture. I think, very early, and I think Matt, my third project, there was this little dining table in this apartment of one of Matt's clients that came in. And I just remember us constantly creatively thinking about this table and the way it was going to work with the acrylic top and the stainless steel cantilever legs. And so that was really the start of this idea of scaled design and how we can think about things at all scales. And ultimately that led us to our relationship with Arterias.
Okay. And I mean, it's a big practice, isn't there? So collaboration within the practice itself is a very key part of what you do. How do you divide the work between the two of you?
I mean, what I was going to say, I was going to add one thing to what Andrew said, which is what a lot of firms do is isolate their verticals, right? You have a residential studio, a hospitality studio, multifamily studio. We have always operated, maybe it's because we're too ADD or OCD or somewhere in between, but we've always embraced
a D.
We've always embraced what we always call the space between. And the space between architecture interiors, the space between residential and hospitality, the space between product and interior design, and so on and so forth. Because that's sort of what we always say is where the magic happens, right? It's the connection between those spaces. It's where that Venn diagram overlaps and you start to really see interesting things happen, interesting experiences happen. And I think that's really where our sort of interest in product came out of. It came out of finding a need to sort of answer a question right? So we were dealing with a particular situation in a particular product, and we needed a solution. And it was a solution that we couldn't find on the market. So we came up with our own solution. And that's really how we've always expanded our practice, right? We initially started, like Andrew said, as an architecture firm. We expanded into interiors because we really couldn't find the right solution that felt right to us. And it was the same thing sort of as we continued to evolve. And I think that, Andrew and I, to answer your next question, is we're sort of very similar and very different. We ultimately, we say all the time, we come together, we approach things in very different ways, but we ultimately have the same goal. And we are probably more aligned than we are unaligned, although over 20 something years of practice and friendship and mentorship and all of that, there have been, plenty of battles along the way. But I think we ultimately trust each other, and we trust each other's intuition, and we trust the way that each other sees something, even though it might be different than the way we see it. So I think we overlap all the time. We step on each other's toes all the time, but we recognize that there's a valid point of view there, and I think ultimately that's what's propelled the work forward.
Yeah, and presumably that that's absolutely what you need when you then collaborate outside of your own firm. So
sure.
This collaboration with Arteria, it's the first time you've worked with them. It's the first time they've ever worked with an architecture and design studio. How did it come about?
Matt?
Matt.
Yeah. I think it's like anything, like any good relationship. You start with the first date. We had always used Arteria's product on a lot of our projects. We had been really experimenting with product development, and we had a number of licensing opportunities, prior to this. And so we really sort of thought that there was an opportunity to continue to develop the way that we think through product design. And we had a kind of first meeting with Arterias. We started really riffing on what makes Workshop tick, what we're interested in. They started telling us what their needs were and what they were looking for and what their access is. I mean, they reach 80 countries. They deal with with craftsmen and manufacturers all over the world. So the more they talked, the more we were interested. The more we talked, the more they were interested. And it sort of came together like that. We did a number of initial concepts and sketches, just kind of riffing on their ideas. And it was a back and forth. And I think any successful collaboration, any successful relationship is where you are open to each other's ideas. You listen to each other and you kind of propel each other forward. And they have a tremendous amount of knowledge in the industry and in craftsmen and the way different people work all over the world that we simply don't possess. And so the way that they influenced our thinking really helped develop the products as well. And when they told us what they wanted, we were able to come to it with our own point of view, which was, given their history, maybe a little bit less decorative. Like you said, it was coming sort of the first time through an architectural eye, not necessarily an interior design eye, although we do a tremendous amount of interior design work. It was a little bit more of a streamlined approach. It was a little bit more of a kind of a curated approach. And ultimately that resonated with them, and they felt like that helped fill a need in their market as well.
And how does it sort of push your practice? What's the joy of it for you, Andrew? Presumably these sorts of collaborations, one of the points of doing them is to kind of get slightly outside of your comfort zone.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, sure. At the end of the day, for us, everything is about making, right? We are a firm that likes to produce tangible content. We're not a theoretical firm that's producing more of an academic approach where things are not being built. We like the act of building and making, hence the name of our collection at the end of the day, meaning and making. So ultimately for us, the excitement was working with makers really around the world, something that we're not, as Matt, I think just touched on, not really well versed in, and understanding the limitations of certain people due to regional skill sets and technologies that they may have. And ultimately, we felt at the end of the day, through the Arteria's collection and past work that they had done, that they were going to be able to bring this level of craft that is something that's really embedded in all of our work, something that we while it is an overused term, this idea of craft, it still is something that embodies what we're after, materials that sort of have the true essence of what they are, and they sort of reveal themselves through their connection, through their space between with the other materials in a project, that we were very excited about. And And that's really how our ideas launched. They were more about understanding sort of a process and a material, and then that evolved into the forms that we created.
Well, we can have a look at some of the processes, and the collection is divided into 4 subsets, and each one of those is named after a traditional act of making, isn't it? There's I think is really, really interesting, and so highlights the fact that making is at the root of this.
Yeah, I think, I mean, this
Charlotte,
page,
go
ahead, Matt.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, it is.
This is the
We're
problem.
going to say the same thing.
See, we're gonna say the same thing. This is the problem. It's Matt's turn. Matt's up. No, Matt's up. It's alternating. It's pinball. It's easy. It's easy.
There is, when you look at this, first of all, you think about where we are today, right? Where we are today in the 21st century, we spend a tremendous amount of time staring at screens, right? We're staring at one now, talking to you. We've got our phones, our laptops. It's all this sort of very slick surface. Maybe because of that, who knows, but maybe because of that, we've become really interested, I think, culturally in a lot of tactility, in the idea of the hand of a material, in the idea of making. It's why we all love going to farmers markets and because it's a physical activity. You go there, you get to scavenge and see what you find, and you delight in finding that incredible peach or that apple or whatever, what the vegetables you find there. And it's the same thing with all the images on the left. When you see people making things, when you see their hands touching things, when you see things come to life, there's something incredibly beautiful about it. And there's something wondrous, right? And clearly that's part of our history. I mean, you live in a country where, stone carving goes back thousands of years, right? And you think about the way that people treated materials back then, stone, wood, all these things. And I think at the end of the day, we still follow those same traditions. We're still in love with that same feeling that you get when you see the way that a person can actually make something. And so ultimately that feeling, that desire to sort of understand and see and visualize craft was what really kind of propelled all of these themes forward.
Okay, so let's look at some of the actual pieces. I think the first one we've got is this subset collection Roll, which is all about hand making and clay. So Andrew, your turn. Tell us about this.
Once again, it was about this idea of materiality. And so I think we were again, it's very important for us to state that this collection was developed with a few of the product designers and senior designer and design directors in our office. And so everybody brought sort of their own creative energy to the table. And as we were just sort of conceptualizing this idea, we were actually playing with Play-Doh and clay. And one of the other collections, my wife is sort of a junior pottery enthusiast. And so we were really pulling from all sorts of things that were allowing us to focus on a material, its components, and what we could do with it. And these just were really about playing, like literally sort of engaging with a material and having fun and coming up with a form that we felt was interesting, was unique, was clean, and could pair itself against other more rectilinear elements, much like the image on the left shows. I think, as architects, we think about things, curved elements are experienced in a more effective way when set against a straight line, and vice versa. And I think all of those sort of foundational design approaches that we learn in creating buildings and structures and things like that were brought to all of these projects that we created, all of these components that we created here with Roll. So the interesting thing is in the process of working with Arterias, we designed a whole host of product that actually never was built. It didn't make it off either the cutting floor or off round one. And Roll was part of a much larger collection of lighting and other accessories. And these were the pieces that sort of made the cut. To say it just wasn't, we felt as though there was some overlap in some of the other content that we created, but everybody really resonated with these. And what we understand is they're doing incredibly well. I think everyone in our office has a few of them as well.
Oh, the bowl with the apples in on the left. I mean, it so speaks of clay. I mean, it's just it's wonderful, and hand making. It really does. It's beautiful. You just want to touch it.
You want to touch it. Yes.
And I think our next one is Bend. So this is all about glass. So Matt, tell us about this one.
Yeah, this was inspired very much by the images on the left. This idea of slumping glass, thinking about just a simple material, a material that's been used for thousands of years, and how we can begin to sort of transform it, both in terms of its shape and its texture. And so we really wanted all of these collections are really intended to be very simple, right? You don't see too many materials coming together. You don't see a ton of embellishment. You see what we always think of as sort of one material, one move. And we've said this for years, that if you can achieve a beautiful design through one material and one move, you've captured the essence of that, right? And ultimately, when we think of some of the greatest works of architecture and the greatest pieces of furniture, they're often very simple. They're often very, very simple statements. And so I think that's really what sort of propelled this collection. We started thinking about the properties of glass, the ability to bend it, the translucency that you can achieve, the modeling effect that you can achieve. And this one, especially in that third image, you see the texture on the shade. If we had a closer up image of the ones on the right, you'd really see that texture is very apparent. And just the way that in the previous group in roll, you sort of feel the hand making of the clay. Here you do visualize that texture. You really sort of capture it, and the light, the way the light bounces through it, it's really it's really, really exceptional. So it really turned out great.
You know, you want to touch it. It's got, I mean, it's so simple, and yet it's warm and rich because there's so much texture to it. Beautiful. And I think we've got Glaze next, which is ceramic finishes and beautiful sort of porcelain finishes.
Sure. As I touched on before, my wife was experimenting with all different things early on, and I think I brought into the office a few of her sort of mistakes. Or the pieces that sort of didn't fire very well, and sort of this idea of how we can affect the finish and embellish the form through this sort of glaze technique. One thing that I think is a very important characteristic in all of the pieces that we produce with Arterias is this idea of the power of repetition and sort of configuration. We wanted to build into this flexibility for the end user, right? We're designing a product that people are going to use in 100 different ways, and ideally residential projects and hospitality projects. And we really thought a lot about how you could take an individual element and repeat it both on a wall or also repeat it within the piece itself. So on the right, you can see single pendants converted into double pendants, single sconces converted to double sconces, lamp sconces. The one piece in the middle, which is sort of this armature sticking out, is about how you can sort of create the power of repetition on a wall through 1 or 10 and rotate these around, really giving freedom to the end user, to the designer that will ultimately use the pieces that we're producing, because that's how we think about it when we're picking a product and placing it in one of our projects. We want to take that amazing piece that we have fallen in love with, but somehow make it our own and put it through our lens so that it feels unique to our project. And I think in all of these collections, that ability is something that any designer or end user really has the ability to do, which is pretty exciting. About it. And the finishes here are a sort of crackled glaze finish. Again, this idea of the firing of a glaze within a form. And Arterias, through their collaborators, really did a great job at creating a finish that feels pretty authentic and pretty unique. And we were pretty excited with how it turned out. We can't really see it here that much in these images, but it is on there as you zoom in closer.
I think later in the presentation. Later in the presentation, I think you'll see a close up of the crackle on the shade, and it's stunning. It's stunning.
Lovely.
And there was great care taken, and not only as Matt articulated before, like the sort of the slumping of the glass, while it is one material, one move, there's always a secondary material embedded in it. So the lamps had a little bit of wood in them, a little bit of metal. We played with some knurling textures in the metal just to give it a little more depth and reflected light. We were very focused on this idea of lamping and working with LED technology in some of these to understand how the lamping could really affect the light quality. Something that oftentimes designers are not super focused on the output of the product. They're more focused on what the product looks like. And in today's day and age, with the ever-changing technology and lighting, it's very important to understand lamping at a much higher level. And certainly we were educating ourselves and working with the folks at Arterias to gain a better knowledge of that. So we could be proud of our product as it went on the wall, because we've all too often bought pieces the lamping is terrible. We hang them and we go, oh, this is not going to work. And so that's a real challenge that we all try to avoid these days to get our temperatures and quality of light right.
Absolutely. And you say this,
like where I am now, the lighting is horrible. So, you get a sense of that in any environment you're in.
And I guess the fact that you're architects means you're quite focused on that, that side of your
we focus, Charlotte, we focus
on
on
everything,
too much, right? We focus on too much. It's actually, it's both painful, toxic, and invigorating at the same time. That's the problem.
And it results in very beautiful work because it's, you're kind of, you cover each of the aspects you need to think about. So
at the end of the day, it's about balance, right? It's about, like Andrew said, if you walk into a room and the room is amazing, but the light is too sharp, you'll notice it right away. It'll hit you and you'll be like, oh, that's not good. That's ruining this moment. So, lighting and the temperature of lighting and the sort of the power of the light, the direction of the light, the diffusion of the light, all that stuff is super, super important to creating a space.
Yeah, absolutely. And this collection, it's launched already in the US earlier this year and has been very, very well received. And it's a huge collection, which is, I think there are 48 pieces. So it's very expansive and it's used in both residential and hospitality. Oh, we haven't talked about Cut. Let's go on to this. Tell us about this.
This is the fourth collection. So this was obviously inspired by cut glass. I was in Ireland with my family 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and we went to the Waterford factory and we watched the artisans cut glass. 4 years ago? God, a long time ago. All right, time is blurring.
We're 2 years into a pandemic, Matt.
I know.
2 years into COVID.
But we watched. I think it's like anything. When you just see the product in the store, you look at it and you say, okay, that's a beautiful glass or a beautiful plate or whatever. When you actually go and you watch these artisans at their wheels doing these perfect geometries and really sort of, and then we actually tried to make our own and they were terrible. we couldn't keep a straight line if we tried. And it was really amazing to watch them achieve this. And it was really amazing to then think about the effect that cut had on the material. And so it was sort of that idea that said, can we take this technique, which is obviously ages old, often used in maybe a more traditional way, and bring it into a more modern language. And we started to experiment with that. And these mirrors are really beautiful. The frame is a beautiful sort of charcoal wood. So it's got a little bit of a grain in it as you get closer to it. It's not sort of painted or anything like that. It's got a lovely quality to it. And then the way that the light sort of diffracts because of the cuts really kind of subtly changes as you move and you're sort of picking up, the light is kind of reflecting against the cuts. And so there's something really simple about this, but also just really beautiful. So we're really happy with the way it turned out.
And as you say, really modern, but, although it's using this very old technique, beautiful. As I was saying rather prematurely before about the collection launched in the States, and it's been very successful. And now it's launching at Focus in the Arteria showroom, which is very exciting. Looking at it, it's got this really kind of considered, crafted modernity, which seems to be very much of a mood at the moment. But do you think that is a growing trend? And if it is, what do you think is behind that? I don't know.
It's interesting. It's an interesting question that, I think as designers, I think everybody strives for this idea of creating timeless experiences, right? And design is an experience at the end of the day, how you engage with space or with products or sit in things, touch things, look at things as we've talked about. And it's a topic that we talk about a lot in our office. We talk about it a lot with our clients. They don't want to live in a home that feels dated in 10 years. And people say, wow, that's very 2010. And so I think, as Matt said it earlier, really when we look at things that inspire us, we categorize things as mid-century, turn of the century, Beaux-Arts, you can go way back, but ultimately what we gravitate to are the things that are simple and refined and edited and curated and composed and are based on the qualities of certain materials. And I think when you reduce design down to those simple foundational elements, you're ultimately going to create something that feels more timeless. As a firm, we've had the ability to work in many historic districts around the country. where each one brings its own unique flair, its own unique characteristic to it. And when you ultimately dig through the bad design that's occurred over the past 30, 40, 50, 60 years, and you get to the root of history, you often find that those characteristics are more modern than the embellishments that have occurred in the past 20, 30, 40 years. That history is rooted in foundational elements that are simple, clean, well thought out, well proportioned, well curated, and ultimately, not to get too outside the realm of this conversation, ultimately that's exactly what we try to do with this product. So when I think if you're hanging the Glaze fixture today, I think in 30 years you walk into a room and that piece looks like it could have been created 80 years ago, it could have been created 10 years ago, or it could have been created today. And for us, that's really what we try to bring to everything we do. We're never trying to be caught in the moment. We're trying to think about things that have worked for us. And as a firm, we ultimately look back at our past work a lot to evaluate, to learn from. Maybe that felt a little too of the moment, a little too on trend. And we evaluate, and we're very self-critical. Matt and I are, as he said, we've offended each other a few times. We offend some people in our office occasionally, but ultimately we're trying to drive towards something that feels as though it's authentic and true to the problem we're trying to solve, like we said. And if you do that, you're going to create something that stands the test of time, both in Europe, in the US, in Asia, in anywhere, because people are really striving for that simple, that simple pared down aesthetic right now, sure. We find.
And there's also something, as far as I understand it, a sort of thinking that's very central to the work you do about how good design can enhance the human experience. And as we look at these really images of this collection, and it's so beautiful and so tactile, even through this, digital format. How does this collection kind of add to that thinking, Matt?
You just said it, and we've said that in our sort of language for a long time. Design, we don't think of design as benign. We don't think of design as background or static. We think of design as a very, very active protagonist in your life, right? You live with it, you wake up with it, you go to sleep with it, you work with it, you deal with a designed environment, for better or worse, all throughout your entire life. Yeah. And when you come into contact with something that inspires you, that changes how you feel, that changes your mood, right? Then that design has been effective. And I think we've all experienced those moments of delight when you walk into a space and you sort of light up and you want to touch the walls and you want to touch the pieces. And you just go, wow. And you feel better for it. You feel like you've gained something, right? You feel privileged. And I think that we, like Andrew was just talking about, we sort of want to approach all of our work like that. We want our work to stand the test of time, but we also want it to delight. Right? We want the homeowners that we work for to come home every day and walk into their space and feel great about it. We just made a presentation the other day to a client, and they emailed us afterwards, and the presentation was mind-blowing. And it was one of Andrew's projects. I wasn't working on it. I saw it afterwards, blew my mind as well. The client responded, and they were simply just like, I can't get over what you guys have done, meaning they were delighting in it as well. And that, again, I wasn't involved in it, so I'm patting the rest of the team on the back. It's just, that's the sense you want to have. That's the sense you want to have when you walk into a hotel. That's the sense you want to have when you spend money on a product, right? You want to feel like it's contributing positively to your life. Absolutely. And I think that's how we approach all of our products, all the things we've designed.
I think
we're biased because we're biased because we do this for a living. So clearly we believe that's the way everyone should live.
But it's true. I mean, we have to have stuff in our homes to, lights to see by, and they should bring us delight. And this collection absolutely does. And I cannot wait to go and see it in the showroom up at Arteria's. Thank you so much and congratulations. Thanks for your time today.